Hi, this is Steve from pixelbump.com. Welcome to our new tutorial on the cloner in Cinema 4D. I know we've done a lot of Cinema 4D tutorials, and I know we haven't touched the MoGraph module much, which is a shame because I actually use that on a daily basis for both motion graphics and visual effects. And one of the types of effects that keeps coming up for me over and over again are pinboard, flipboard type of animations. Now, these are the kind of animations where you've seen something like this in this old Nine Inch Nails video, which is one of my favorite examples. Or something more like this from the first two X-Men films, where they had a table pinboard which showed an idea of how their mission would go. Or something like this that I've done more than once, which is a flipboard animation with a bunch of tiles that all move independently of each other. And all of those are very easy to recreate here in Cinema 4D using the cloner and just a couple different effectors. So let's dig into how to do a couple of them. So we're going to start with that pinboard effect we saw in the Nine Inch Nails video. And to do that, the first thing I'm going to need to do is create my pin. So I'm going to create a cylinder here, get it going in the Z direction, and I'm going to bring up my 4 views, and we'll just make this pretty thin here, and maybe about a 1 by 50. I think that's going to work pretty well. And I'll go ahead and give myself a couple extra segments, and I'm going to reduce my rotation segments. We're going to be creating a lot of clones here, so wherever you can save geometry is really the best thing you can do for yourself. So I'll go ahead and make my NURBS object geometry, and then I'm going to come in and grab one too many sections. I'm going to shrink down the back end of this, and then I'm just going to kind of move a few pieces here until I have a lovely little pin shape. And let's go ahead and shrink that down a little more, just so the pin head looks a little bigger. There we go. And we'll bring this back out. Okay, so now we've got a lovely, lovely pin. It's the greatest pin ever created by man. All right, so to recreate that pin board, I'm going to come in and grab my favorite part of the MoGraph module, the cloner. I use this for modeling, I use it for animation. When I'm in cinema, at some point, I'm probably bringing a cloner in. So I'll drop my pin underneath my cloner, and initially it's going to want to make a linear set of clones, so it's just moving them up right now in the y-axis 50 centimeters each time. That's not quite what I want. I'm going to go ahead and make them a grid, and I'm going to make sure there's only one layer. I'm going to bring the pins in Z down to 1, and 200 by 200 is probably going to be just fine for us. And I bet if we do about 100 by 100, we're going to end up with a nice little pin board here, and there we go. Now you can see I'm struggling already, and that is with fairly low geometry. So if this geometry is ever going to be used in close-up, it's obviously not going to hold up. But one of the things that's good to do is create a high-res, low-res version of your geo, so that way you can work somewhat quickly with the low-res and then swap it out at the last minute before render with your high-res version. We'll go ahead, click Render Instances. That'll just help us speed up a little bit, save where we can. And I'm just going to bring in a couple lights and just position them one on each side a little bit, and make one a little weaker, and the other one will have some shadows to them. So just to give us a little bit of visual interest in our render. Now, the best way to do something like they did in the Nine Inch Nails video is to shoot some video on green screen, which I did. I went ahead and filmed myself walking up and slamming my hands forward, just like Trent. I know I don't look as cool as Trent, but you know, you do what you can. And the video really should be black and white. You can use color, but the effect is going to be a lot stronger if you go ahead and pre-process your video a little bit. I've keyed out my background. I've thrown a white solid behind myself. I've reduced out my color, and then I've crunched up my levels just to give me a little more definition. And then I inverted it, which is something that you're going to need to do in cinema. It's going to see the whites as the most forward and the blacks as the most back. And currently, as we have it set up, it was the other way around. And that's just not going to look right unless you want it to have an inverted look, in which case, cool. So I went ahead and inverted it because I want to try to match that Nine Inch Nails look. So how do I get that video onto these clones? It's really, really simple. We're going to use one of my favorite effectors, which is the shader effector, which is bringing in an image and applying it to our clones. So I'm going to come over to the shading tab. I'm going to leave it on custom shader, and I'm going to navigate over to my texture file. You see I have a image sequence render of what I just showed you. And that's about it. Now all we have to do is come over to our parameter and decide how do we want it to manipulate that data. I'm going to go -50 in Z, and you can see we're starting to push those pins out really far, maybe too far. Maybe that's too much. Let's go to like -20. There we go. That's a little better. Looks a little more real. So if I rewind and I go ahead and hit play, I made a mistake. You got to go and do the same process you would do with any image sequence, which is come in, give it your frame rate, and tell it to calculate. There we go. Now we should be able to hit play, and you'll see the pins are moving along just as I did, and we're creating that exact same look that was done in the Nine Inch Nails video. As a matter of fact, if I go ahead and put them side by side, you'll see how how much it is just like that look. Actually, I'm going to reduce my number of pins here because I think they're probably a little too close together. There we go. Now, if we put them up side by side, there we go. Now we're getting to see that exact same look. And this will work with any video you want to do. Now, the one thing this effect doesn't do very well is give us a true representation of depth. You can see it's really good at the outline of something, but even here, you're going to see that the image is very impressionistic when you're going off of the video. And you're going to get some really weird issues with the shadow, with how the shadows and the light fall on your source image. That's not going to work for something like this. If we went ahead and added in a black and white photo of a city, we wouldn't get that look out of it. We get something similar, but it would be kind of like our pin board. It would be very impressionistic. So if you want to do something like they did in the X-Men film, let's go ahead and open a new scene. Let's go ahead and create another pin. This one we won't even create a head on. We'll just go ahead and make it, again, a 1 by 50. Actually, let's do this one bigger. Let's go 1 by 200. Let's make these nice and long. And we'll move this one. We'll keep this one in the Y-axis. That would make more sense because we're going to be on a tabletop. Go ahead, create a cloner object. We'll drop our pin in. We'll go ahead and do a little reset on it. Again, we're going to use a grid. X and Z this time. Only one pin in the Y direction. And let's go ahead and add in, let's go 200 by 200. Oops. Oh, that's what I did wrong. I added it to the wrong way. There we go. So now we got a little block of pins. And like I said, the best way to recreate this kind of an image is to use a depth map. And you can create a depth map pretty easily in Cinema. I'm going to go ahead, open up my content browser, and I'm going to go to the city kit, and I'm just going to grab a regular old city here. And I'll go ahead and get rid of the lighting effects. I don't need that. And I'll come down here and I'll just shrink down the downtown area so we just have a little more interest in highs to lows. And I'll take my camera, switch it over to a 50mm lens, and we'll go -90. And we'll zero out our X and Z, and we'll pull back. Let's make this a square as well. So we'll go 720 by 540. There we go. And we'll zoom in just a little bit so it fills up the space a little better. And then we'll come back to our camera, look at it from a side view. There it is. And we're about 20,000 units away, about 20,000 centimeters. That's going to be important in just 1 second here, when we want to set our rear depth of field. So we're going to come over to our focus distance, and we're going to go, let's say 19,000. Oh, no, that was too far. Let's say 15. There we go. 15,000, which brings our beginning of our depth plane to just above the buildings. And then we can take our end depth and go about 5,000. There we go. Till it's just below. And the closer you get to this, the more accurate the depth will be in your image. So I'll just come over here and I'm going to add a depth multipass. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make it a PNG file. And I'm going to save it. City depth. I want a regular PNG, not a QuickTime PNG. And I'll do a PNG here. We'll save that out as well. And we'll go ahead and just do a render. And you can see here, if I look at the single passes, there's the color view, our diffuse view. But then we've got this wonderful depth map with a black and white image giving us exactly the height elevation of that city model. So if I go ahead and go back here and I add in my shader effector again, and I open up my depth map, we're going to see that we have a slight issue here, which is the UVs want to run along that Z-axis, and I set this up for Y. Now, our choice is either to go back in and rotate the UVs, or very simply, let's just go ahead and rotate our cloner. So we'll go 100, we'll go 1, and we'll change our cylinder back to Z. And there we go. Now, if we just come up, here we see that we have an inverted problem. Like I said, Cinema wants the blacks and whites to be flipped. And here we're getting a negative of the city, which is easy enough to fix. What you want to do is come down here, add a filter to your image, enable clipping, and then just swap these two values. And by doing that, you will now get a nice corrected depth image. And you can see we've got a really good representation of our city. If I come back over to my city kit, bring it down, and then swap between the two, you can see we've got a really nice graphical representation of that city now. And if we wanted to add animation to it, we could either animate this image in After Effects, or we can come in here to our shader effector. And we can just ramp it up and down for build-ons. A really fun effect that's really great for both motion graphics and visual effects. Let's go ahead and add a little light here. Again, we'll dupe it. Make this one a little weaker. We'll add some shadows in. And we've got a very cool pinboard looking city, which again, a very good match for that effect. And now the final thing that I've done over and over again with the cloners are these flip boards. Keeps coming up, so it's definitely something we should address. So we're going to start that one out with a cube. And we're going to go ahead and in the Z, bring this way down. And let's go ahead and make this a 100 by 100. And we'll go ahead and give it a little bit of a rounded corner. Let's go 0.25, or sorry, 2.5, and maybe 3 sections. Again, the less geometry you have, the easier this is going to be later. Let's go ahead and make our geometry editable, and we're going to create 2 selections here. And that is because I want to add some colors to the back and front so you can see easier what's about to happen. So I'm going to set one selection here, and I'm going to call this the front. And then I'm going to flip this around, grab that guy, create another selection, call this the back. There we go. And I'm going to create 2 new materials. The first one I'll just color pretty straight red. And the second one we'll go with a blue, just so there's a nice difference between the 2 of them. I'm going to drop those materials onto my cube, and I'll go ahead and make the blue my front and the red my back. So once we've got it flipping around, you'll be able to see very easily which side we're on. So again, I'm going to come back, grab my cloner, drop my cube under it. I'm going to create one more time a grid. And again, I'm going to reduce in the Z. And for this one, let's go out here. Maybe let's try 1,000 by 1,000. And with how many we have, that should be 100 and 100, right? No. This is why I wanted it simple. Oh, 10 by 10. That's what that's going to be. Okay. See, math is just not my strong suit. So let's go ahead and create some more here, because this is one of those things that looks really cool if you have a bunch of them. Well, maybe not that many. Let's in the Y half that. There we go. Got a weird redraw issue there, and I think that's because both of my textures here are set to both. So I'm going to go ahead and set that one to front, that one to back. There we go. That solved that problem. So now what we can do is come in and use a couple different effectors here. And with our cloner selected, we're going to grab a plane effector. And I'm not going to want to do position with this one. I'm going to want to do rotation. And here in the fall off, instead of infinite, I'm going to set this to linear. And that's a unique option you don't see with some of the other effectors. So I'm going to change it to a X orientation. And now, as you can see, if I slide it across, we're going to get wherever that plane effector is crossed, you'll get the front side on one and the back side on the other. Now, right now it's only going to do right along that line, which isn't what we really want. So to aid in the swap over, I'm going to go ahead and grab another effector, and it's going to be a random effector. And I'm going to place my random effector underneath the plane, so when the plane is moving, it will drive random. And I'm going to take my random, and instead of being infinite, I'm going to change it over to a box. I'm going to bring up my box size, be big enough to cover this whole thing. There we go. And we'll widen it out in X. There we go. So now as it travels along, it will disrupt and gives us a nice wider area to be flipping. But our random is right now set to positions which we don't want. We're going to want to have it move a little bit in the same direction. And let's go ahead and get that lined up a little bit there with our planar effector. There we go. Now we've got a little disruption happening along the line, a little ahead of it and a little behind, so it helps break it up, make it look a little more natural. So let me go ahead and bring it off to a side here, and I'll set a keyframe in my X, and then over 2 seconds, I'll bring it across, and I'll set another keyframe here. And let's go ahead and take a quick preview of it. All right, so we've got our preview here set up. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And that's a pretty good flip effect, but it doesn't really have any interactivity with the tiles themselves, meaning that once they flip, they're just flipped. It's very robotic, very mechanical. And if you've ever seen one of these in real life, you know that there's a little bit of give and wiggle as they flip over. So that would be something we'd want to add in as well. And that's really easy to add in with one more effector, and we're going to use the delay effector. And I'm going to put the delay effector right here underneath the planar effector as well. And if we back it up and we go ahead and play it now, watch what's going to happen. Here, let's go ahead and reduce this down a little bit because it's just unworkable. It's getting to be a bit of a problem to try to keep this going at this high resolution. So let's just bring this down by half. That should help us out a bit. There we go, that's a little better. So now let's go ahead and play it through. And you're gonna see not much of a difference. And that's because we need to check the stack of the effectors. And the way this works best is to move the random first, then the plane effector, then the delay effector. And you can see a little bit here, if we do another preview, you're gonna see they're still moving a little bit. And to get them to kind of go a little more, let's turn off scale and position here, and we'll come to the effect and we'll bring it up to 80%. Now, you can see they're a little slower to but they're still not giving us the wiggle, and that's because we need to switch this over to spring mode. And now, with everything in place, there we go. Now we get that nice bounce back and forth. We get this really cool secondary animation for no extra cost. So let's go ahead and do one more preview here. And we'll go ahead and preview that. And you can see that it just has a much nicer, more organic feel now. All right. So those are some of my favorite techniques with the shader effector and the cloner object. And I think that's where we're going to end today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've learned something that you can use in your work. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or in the comments. Or if you have a can on a string, give that a shot. And if you want to keep learning, we have more great tutorials and assets for you to use in your work over at pixelbump.com. Thank you so much for watching. Go and create.